So it's a privilege again to have such an eminent panel here with us. And with a brief introduction, I want to get the proceedings off the way. First, we have Rohit Kapoor, and a very eminent background. He's from Qualcomm, has done his PhD from University of California, extensive interactions with telcos worldwide, and special expertise on narrowband IoT. So welcome, Rohit. And Anand Nadar from Tata. Anand? You there? Oh, great. So he's a GSM expert, has been with Nokia, Ericsson, and Hutchinson Max, so knows the world out there very well. And of course, old colleague Rajesh Charya, many of you would know him. He heads up the ISPI. He was he set up the NICSI, very active at the ICANN, and of course at the other industry forums. And of course, last but not the least, Arvind. He is he's a vice president at Virtusa with 17 years of experience, across the world. So what we are hoping to cover today is, one is with a focus on the IoT and the M2M space. But not only that, what the keynote speaker just said, that while India has a large number of people who are connected, but we also have the privilege of the largest number of people not connected. So how are you going to, while we talk about the numbers who are connected, but how do you get the folks who are not yet connected? And, is there a role within that of ICANN or the internet governance mechanisms, and what can help with that? A brief, I'll just take about where we stand on the internet space in India. Of course, the size of the market's been mentioned. Rural market, a very important thing is about spectrum, which has been auctioned. So because it's an international gathering, some things we in India have done pretty well, but there are many things we could have done better. And that is possibly the reason why so many are still unconnected. So what is it that we need to do better, which could also provide an example to the rest of the community internationally who possibly would be looking at the efforts that we have here? Some of the new technologies in vogue, I'm sure Rohit will cover some of that. There's a lot of discussion on Wi-Fi offload or LoRaN or, projects like Loon or satellite-based or the drones. So there's a lot more that's happening. And just yesterday I was reading how Facebook has put up, opened up some of the hardware as open source, which anybody can manufacture as well. The other we have is, there was a mention in the brief that, there's always a bit of a debate about how many people are actually connected in India and what the statistics are. What was mentioned was 462 million internet subscribers. But that's not really where the big challenge is. The challenge, I think, would be more in how do you build up the $2 ARPU that we have. So we are about 13% of the internet, total number of people connected as telecom subscribers, because more or less we only have one network. That's the mobile wireless network. Unlike many other countries which have, developed countries particularly had a very extensive wireline network where people were already connected up to a phone line, and you had a cable TV network on that, plus a satellite network. Here, there is only one network, and I guess that's also a similar feature in most, developing countries or countries which have not yet got most of the people connected onto the internet. So the fact is that the mobile broadband and the mobile wireless internet will be a lot of area of focus, and let's see how that would help. With that, I think what we'll do is what got mentioned was what are the initiatives that the Indian government has done. So, of course, we have the National Optical Fiber Network to have a good, secure, resilient, scalable fiber network. Because whatever much you may do on the wireless, but the backbone or takeaway has to be extensively on fiber. So there's a lot of effort going, but there I think we could have done much better. than we have. We've been speaking about it for the last 4 or 5 years, but the targets which were to be met had not been met. So there's a lot of learning as to what you should not have done in the way we handle that part. And let's see how we are handling the next part. The other good news is the Smart Cities and the Digital India program. So what happens is that telecom is driven centrally in many countries. But the fact is you are dependent on a federal structure or in states for issues like right-of-way, or even, if you want to deliver services over M2M or the IoT, so where the education sector or the health sector or the transportation sector are areas for rules, regulations, and compliance are under the state governments. So it's not just your interaction of the regulatory policies at the center, but also your interactions at the local and municipal levels, where 5G or the IoT or M2M service delivery will actually take place. So how do you handle that part is something which I hope we'll be able to cover. So straight off, with that as a background, I'll request Rohit to cover, as narrowband IoT and your experience in other geographies, how that's happening and what's the relevance here in India.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. I just want to say maybe a couple of more things about myself to kind of put things in perspective, for everybody about, where my thoughts are going to come from. So I've, been in Qualcomm R&D for almost about 15 years. And, I've kind of been there from the beginning of, when data was being enabled over cellular. In fact, the first project I worked on, it was really kind of trying to enable that. And then I worked on, more 3G technologies, also worked on LTE, traveled to standardization forums, evangelized technology, with various operators around the world. So that's kind of my background, right? So kind of with that said, I just want to kind of point out that, I think today I feel there's a lot of excitement in the cellular industry. In the sense that the technologies that have kind of that are coming out over the last couple of years through the standardization process, as well as a lot of companies are making announcements on the cellular side. I think they are going to provide enormous benefits to kind of enable adoption of IoT. And what's kind of leading the way in all of this, in my view, on the cellular side is essentially the things that are happening on the LTE side. And I'm going to maybe walk through a few of those. But just to kind of take a step back and give a perspective on cellular itself and why we think it's a very good fit for IoT technologies. So basically, what's the keynote speaker also mentioned that security is kind of a big deal, in today's world, especially cybersecurity, and we think it's going to be an even bigger issue when it comes to IoT technologies. So what at a high level, cellular brings is kind of a security mechanism which has pretty much been unbreached for decades. Right, and if you look at the evolution of security over cellular networks, it's only gotten much more secure, much better with LTE even compared to previous technologies like 3G. So that's kind of an enormous benefit I feel that that cellular brings, right? This kind of whole end-to-end thought-out security model which has worked in practice very nicely, right? Other than that, the fact that there's kind of pretty much ubiquitous coverage of cellular pretty much everywhere. I think that's a huge advantage for for IoT devices. Getting into a little bit more specifics of NB-IoT, since the moderator asked me to touch upon that a little bit. So what's happened in the last couple of years with LTE technology in particular is that there's kind of been a few key areas which have really sort of evolved. Few key different aspects in terms of making end devices becoming very suitable for IoT, and kind of the three axes of that, if I really look at, are cost, power consumption, as well as coverage, and I'll touch upon each of these. So kind of what's happened in the standards process over the last couple of years is that from a cost point of view, the cellular industry has defined new standards, which are under the gambit of NB-IoT, which kind of allow you to build very simple low cost end devices, and Qualcomm and other companies are also kind of have announced projects towards that. So these should really help bring the cost of ownership of M2M down over time. The second axis where a lot of progress has been made is in power consumption, because ideally what you really want to do is, say you want to build a water meter, you want to just kind of throw it in your basement and leave it for 10 years, for example, right, without having to worry about recharging batteries and so on. So there's an enormous amount of technology advancement that's happened in the last couple of years in terms of adding new features, simplifying a lot of protocols, to the extent that cellular technologies can actually run, these NB-IoT technologies can run on microamps of current, which, if anybody is familiar with with cellular technologies, is not where our smartphones are, for example, right? And the third axis that I also want to point out is the one of coverage, because so this is kind of also very key for a lot of applications in the IoT space, because again, ideally what you want is that you want sort of coverage coming all the way to your basement, for example, because you want to be able to throw in a power meter, water meter, or some sensors there, and kind of not have to worry about oh, is my cellular coverage reaching there or not, right? So with these new advancements that are happening in the NB-IoT space in LTE, it'll enable you to very easily be able to cover basements in your house, or maybe different floors, or maybe different parts of your house that with today's technology are perhaps a little bit more difficult to cover, right? So I feel that a lot of these things are coming together, the right price points, as well as these types of advancements. And sort of another thing to mention is that there's also kind of leading into what's being planned for 5G as well. So 5G is kind of going to take this another step forward, and it's going to try to enable, over the next, I would say, 2, 3, 4 years, use cases which are which can somewhat be addressed with, for example, LTE-like technologies today, but kind of take it another step forward. And chief among these use cases are mission-critical use cases. Like, for example, if you want, industrial control, through cellular technologies. So 5G is kind of gearing up to build very, very low latency, capabilities on, over the air. And so even those types of markets, will likely open up for IoT over cellular. So overall, we see huge excitement. Just to kind of summarize sort of in a one sentence, I think maybe about 15 to 20 years back, we were all trying to connect people with people through voice. Maybe about 10, 15 years back until today, we've been connecting, people to servers and machines, aka data, right? And now we are kind of connecting machines to machines, right? And each of these problems has had very different challenges, and has led to tremendous amount of innovation, I feel. So very exciting times, I feel, yeah.
Rohit, thank you very much. I think, what we hear is clearly there's a lot of excitement. Now, the excitement also, has to get translated to actually delivery on the ground. And much of it also gets related to what are the kind of enabling policy measures do you have where the internet can be grown, right? And no better than my colleague Rajesh, who has been seeing the space for many, many years. So one is, the unconnected people, as Rohit says, it's not just people anymore, but also devices and, Internet of Things. How do you see in terms of, the policy measures? What got mentioned was MVNOs. So in terms of policy, this year at least, we've had a number of good enabling policies, whether it was for spectrum sharing, trading, MVNOs, mergers and acquisitions. They're already translating on the ground. So are these good enough? Or, what are the more enabling policy measures you think that we could take in India, which could get emulated by other regulators as well? Your thoughts?
Thank you, Vikram. I'm speaking on perspective of India. And then I will be coming to the point that how the internet, as you are saying, the policy affects the penetration of the broadband or through machine to machine. In our country, when the internet was opened by our former Prime Minister Atalji, and after that the licensing was framed, we were expecting a lot of change, that the policy and the technology will go together. But what I found after a lot of deliberations since 1999 till date, because I am connected from 1999 till date, somehow the government, which should be doing the work of governance, projected themselves as a businessman. What we have found into the government governance, that when government wants to project or improve any industry, they support directly or indirectly. Like in few of the northeast India or in some hill area where there is no industrial development, government supports them that if you will be putting the industry over there, you will be getting a lot of subsidy and lot of benefits in terms of taxation, in terms of other facilities. Knowing that internet will be the future and internet will be the only communication solution, that everything has to come on the IP and the packets. Somehow we found that we have limited ourselves to the one sector only. In numbers, we can say that we are 13% in penetration, second largest in broadband. But if we are not able to connect our rural India to the mainstream of urban area, we are not at all connected. We still are claiming 456 million internet connectivity, but when we talk of the broadband, we are merely running towards the 20 or 25 million broadband, true broadband connectivity. And our target is 600 million broadband by 2020. BharatNet, a good initiative by the government, and I hope that this time, after the revision in the policy and the revision in the structure, this will take off. And even after the announcement of the multi-stakeholder policy or the multi-stakeholder things into the country, the government will seriously think about the multi-stakeholder and will take private sector into the consideration when they talk of broadband penetration into the country. In mobile, we know that we have penetrated a lot and we are the, not I will say largest, but one of the largest in penetration. But mobile and internet cannot be mixed with each other because the user of the mobile, even the illiterate people knows that by pressing the green button I can connect, and by pressing the red button I can disconnect, and I can press some few numbers which everybody knows, even he is a totally illiterate. But broadband or internet requires a handholding in the rural area. Because internet is not simple that if you are pressing anything and it can be go and your users will be getting converted to what you want. Internet actually requires a handholding, and that too by a local entrepreneur, not by a centralized department. Reason, we have got 22 languages from north to east, north to south, and east to west. There is no similarity. And a local guy can understand what is the requirement of the internet user over there. Day before yesterday, our Honorable Minister has referred about one of the lady of the Andhra. She is the illiterate, but now she is the digitally literate. If we want that the internet should be penetrated into the whole country, especially the rural India, then I will understand then the internet penetration has taken place. And till the time internet is not getting penetrated into the rural portion of the country, internet is nowhere into the country. Because this is a big gap between urban and rural, and this gap will increase day by day. Local entrepreneur, local ISP can do the work of digital literacy. This confidence should come into the local ISPs, and the ISP sector needs a jack. They don't need a financial support. They need only a jack so that internet should be penetrated.
I'm wondering what that jack is. So could you dwell on what that jack is? But notwithstanding that, the ISP CP, a meeting yesterday highlighted that the universal acceptance, and they've published that in Hindi as well. So this is for the audience. Maybe you'd like to go and see the Hindi version of, I think, their question and answers, which has been published. And there was one discussion about having, internet ambassadors. So do you think there is a need for people who would be ambassadors to promote the internet in rural areas? I think, Uber and Ola have done a fantastic job of self-learning. You sit in the car and the guy, Google Maps is being read out in English, but he's figuring out how to use it.
Okay. Whether the Uber can be used into the village of the Haryana Sapla, where the Uber service is not there, whether the Uber can be available into the villages of the Andhra where nobody knows about the Uber. And regarding your jack, what jack I am saying, recently the government has introduced 6% AGR on the pure internet and broadband in spite knowing that there is no internet penetration at all. And the total recovery on account of this 6% AGR is hardly 100 crores. And at the other hand, government is investing 80,000 crore for the BharatNet.
So that's interesting. I think, different arms of the government, whether they are aligned on actually promoting internet or only promoting, upfront money being sucked out of the system. So that's an open question, and that is something for other countries to note. And if there are regulators from other countries, don't take the money out of the system upfront and leave nothing for being put inside growth of the networks. I think we've goofed up in India on that. So maybe don't follow us on that part at least. 700 megahertz, for example, essentially, I'd like to highlight, essentially it is spectrum over which you'll provide the access. Rohit mentioned for M2M or IoT, there would be some mission critical services for which you need low latency, continuous access of a very high order. But there could be, let's say, he mentioned about a SIM card sitting in a power meter or agricultural sensors, which could only be chirping like birds once in a while. And if there's connectivity, maybe middle of the night where there's low, they could do their data transfer. With that, I'll turn around to my colleague here and say, okay, Arvind, big data, right? How do you see in your ways? But all this is actually generating a lot of data. And, much of the M2M and the IoT will depend on how best you can utilize that data. And of course, affordability of services. So some of the questions that come about is, okay, you've got this data now, and as an analytics person, how are you seeing are Indian companies or companies internationally using this data and processing it, whether it's through the cloud or otherwise, and in which part of the network to provide affordability is addressed, because much of the people who are not yet connected, one of the major reasons is it affordable? Is internet access affordable? And what can we all at ICANN do to try and make it more affordable?
Thanks, Vikram. So my role is I manage the data management analytics function at Virtusa Polaris. So essentially, when we work with customers, the data is already available through the connectivity, through the M2M, so on and so forth. But the real challenge is the volumes of data we're talking about are tremendous. I mean, I know data management has matured significantly in the last few years, but still we have not seen the full capability of what data can be generated. So in fact, in the morning I was having a very interesting discussion on how or where should we even process the data. Should it be processed at the edge, which is essentially closer to the device, or should we push it into a cloud for more centralized data management? And the answer, I don't know if I have a very good answer, but the real answer we have right now at the moment is we are still trying to figure that out. So there are certain principles in terms of how you can look at it. For example, if you need real-time instantaneous response to M2M data or any sort of data, it makes more sense to process it closer to the device itself, right? Rather than pushing it out to a centralized cloud. However, if you are looking at doing more time series type of analysis, which requires more historical data over a period of time, it makes more sense to do it on the cloud. So essentially, there are certain broad principles, but how we actually end up having a good mix of where to process the data is going to be defined by the use cases, by the connectivity, by the ability of the things to actually store data, be able to do some processing. So I just heard from one of the persons at Qualcomm that they're very interested in looking at ways to add some neural networks and artificial intelligence at the chip level itself, where you could be doing some of the local processing. So given all those advancements and the improved connectivity that we're talking about, it's a decision that has to be taken based on use cases. So tremendous scope for innovation here based on the advances in all the other in the hardware and the connectivity space.
Thank you. That's very interesting because, we've, in India at least, the regulators put out a consultation on cloud computing. And very often what happens is, for reasons of security, we go and tie ourselves in knots. And, one of the, at least from our side, what we say is that it is imperative, at least for us, our people, that our business cannot come down. So we'll put in the best security measures that are there. With that, I'll turn to, Anand, who's from Tata Communications. So, Anand, tell us, from M2M, from whatever you've heard, my first poser to you is, coming from a big business group yourself, right? So, what seems to be quite evident is that in the M2M or IoT space, a large business house like the Tatas themselves, or maybe Reliance or the Birlas. So internal to your businesses, there would be a significant, potential for using M2M and IoT. Before you go out and look for other clients, do you think there is scope that within business houses, how do you see that?
Yeah. Thanks. I would start with Tata Communications. When we started kind of looking into M2M as a business, the whole Tata groups, there are a lot of verticals and use cases within M2M as well. So we have approached all the Tata groups to kind of, let's say, asset management, or asset tracking, smart metering. There are a lot of use cases within Tata groups, like it's a huge group where we can kind of connect with from almost 100 companies within Tata itself to kind of reach out and build a society which is directly connected on M2M. Doing so, what enables? We are touching the society with the volumes of devices that we are talking about. That's easily accessible to Tata Communications as a communication organization to reach out to this social locations where what my colleague said about reaching out to the remote locations. We have a presence over there by virtue of Tata Group company touching the lives of any people, even in the rural locations. Let's say a smart meter over there will be connected. So with that as a backside, we started Tata Communications to venture into M2M. But along with that, something that I would like to also convey on this forum would be like along the ISPs or the TSPs just don't give the pipe, they give the technology to the society. Not just NB-IoT, there are a lot of other technologies which are available on the forums on unlicensed spectrum, which is easily accessible and ready to be deployed. So with that at the mindset, we started with something called LoRa, and we've already deployed more than 3 cities, and we will be we have taken up the march to kind of connect almost 100 plus cities within next 18 months to kind of connect these devices with that.
That sounds very interesting. So is this LoRa deployment being done by Tata Communications, or it is in conjunction with some TSP?
It is Tata Communication who is doing that deployment.
That's interesting. So, Rohit, your thoughts on LoRa versus narrowband IoT, you mentioned?
Yeah. Thanks. Actually, this is a really interesting point of discussion, and maybe needs much more time, even beyond what's possible here, right? To be honest, I myself haven't looked at all the details of LoRa, though I do have an idea at a high level, right? I think overall our feeling is that what kind of cellular technologies do bring to the table is worldwide standardization, right? And that has a lot of benefits, right? Because because there's so much learnings from different networks that are deployed across the world that then feed back into the standardization process, and there's kind of this continuous improvement of technology because of that, right? Because there's many players around the world who have a stake in it, right? And we've kind of seen this, this sort of before as well, right? That global standards, at least in the cellular industry, we've seen tend to be a very strong factor in determining success of the technology, right? Other than that, the other reason I touched upon earlier was that things like security and provisioning are very easy to do, very well baked into standards and very well tested over the years. Now, a couple of data points I wanted to mention as well that at least we are seeing in markets like the US and in Korea as well, is that at least some of the operators that we see there who did try some other technologies that were not globally standardized in the past year or couple of years have also started to move towards cellular technologies. And I think part of the reason that I think cellular technologies were not so much adopted, maybe till about a couple of years back, was that there was not adequate progress till then on the definition of IoT technologies within cellular standards. But I think that's changed a lot in the last couple of years and changing very fast as we speak. So while I wouldn't want to hazard a guess, as to kind of what wins out or not, but at least from what we've seen, global standardization, in general, proves to be a very powerful force, right? Because what really happens is that when, if a few operators start to deploy a technology, then other operators who've also followed similar standards in the past, they see, oh, okay, this operator is doing this, so maybe it's a good thing for me to evaluate as well, right? So that kind of, builds momentum upon itself, right?
So it's quite interesting, I think, between various technologies and technology options. The question is whether you would want to deploy it yourself, or do you want to partner with the existing partner with the national footprint, like a big ISP or a telco. So that's some food for thought. I'd like to check with you, Tony, how much time we have more so that we can take up questions from the floor. Or 20 minutes more. Wonderful. Thank you so much. That's nice. So with that, I think, one of the poses I have maybe is that the government has put out a draft M2M, guidelines. So one was the Department of Telecom put up the draft guidelines, and within that they've referred to TRAI for some consultations. So any initial thoughts anybody would have on the M2M paper? Yes?
So the consultation paper is mainly kind of related towards three big aspects. One of them is spectrum. Which spectrum needs to be unlicensed for M2M operations, because as my colleague said, even if it is a standardized body, NB-IoT, it has to be worked only on a licensed spectrum. So, but on a licensed spectrum and looking at the volume of devices that needs to be connected, we feel that it is not sustainable within a licensed spectrum. So what government feels like, which unlicensed spectrum has to be kind of delicensed for the M2M operations in India. So that is one aspect around it. There are a couple of more was related to the roaming, how to have a framework of roaming between a foreign SIM or like international one country, one nation roaming for devices. And the third aspect of which is like, as my colleague covered, it was more related to the security and the data privacy, which we have not touched on till now. Data privacy is kind of something. The data that is going to be generated out of these millions of devices is going to be humongous. And each of it is kind of private on its own application. So that has to be kind of a detailed framework which needs to be put under regulation in terms of data privacy. Not just the data security part of it. Like data privacy, when I say it has to be handled by the respective end user and to the end consumer only. that is something that has been part of the framework.
Interesting, thank you. So yesterday I was at one of the sessions discussing the who is and the ICANN's approach to kind of revise or reform the who is process and maybe identify service providers who provide that facility to the registrars. So what's interesting is that it is a contract between the ICANN and the registrars. So my question to them was, what's the input from the GAC? And I'm not sure whether, in the ISP, CP community, are there, let's say, requirements from the regulators or governments on a more stringent who is? And is that being fed into the ICANN as part of the ISP, CP community? Maybe that's a question we can, try and address when we open up for questions, or if somebody from the ISP, CP committee can elaborate on. With that, I'll request the floor for questions. Okay, let me start from the rear end. Subi, I have your name, so at the back, please identify yourself, pose the question, and in case you want to call upon the panel. Rajesh, after you. Later, first at the rear, we could start. Yeah, Anup.
We need a mic.
Good morning, everyone. Anupam Agarwal, Chairman, Internet Society, Calcutta. The question is to Rajesh ji. You told a very important, very critical paradox that the amount which is collected through AGR is just 100 crores, whereas we are spending 80,000 crores on BharatNet from the government. So you must have asked with the government that why are you putting this AGR again and again through your chairmanship of ISPI. So what is the argument which government is giving back to you for this AGR? I would like to understand that.
The government is saying that nothing is free, and this 6% license fee is our partnership fee, which on the broadband should be there. Without understanding that this is creating a cascading effect of this 8% AGR, because we are nowhere getting the VAT benefit or the credit or the input credit of the earlier paid AGR. So this is the cascading effect. 100 crore what we are calculated on the total revenue of the internet services of the country, especially by the ISPs. So let's see that how the government reacts, because even at one time the TRAI has said that the AGR should be there, but the other end they are saying that at least 5 years there should not be any AGR on the fixed line broadband. So now they are into the deciding factor, and they themselves are confused, because into the last, when Mr. Rakesh Garg was the secretary of the telecom, secretary of the DOT, he also told that by imposing the AGR, the broadband rate will increase and the Digital India program will getting derailed.
Thank you, Rajesh. What is going to happen is that, and this is also for many of the international participants today, so India is actually going through a very historical tax reform called the GST. So one of the things is that the Indian telecom and internet sector is already pretty highly taxed. It's one of the most highly taxed sectors, and when you compare it globally as well. And this is set to increase. So current, from 15%, what we are hearing, at least at the COI, is likely to go up to 18. So overall, the cost of telecom and internet service is set to increase, right? So on one hand, you say, okay, make it more affordable. The other side, you kind of hike the taxes. Okay. Brajesh ji, your question.
Thank you, Vikram ji. First thing is, you referred to just now GST. This AGR, I believe, is over and above GST. And if it could be made part, that could be one thing. But my question is on basically on two counts. One is to Mr. Kapoor. One time you mentioned that you are expecting 10 years battery life for the IoT. In the same breath, you are saying cellular. Both are not possible. cellular lasts, I'm very serious, cellular lasts 4 years, 4 hours, 5 hours. And cellular has got a range of, Mr. Vikram can say, about a kilometer on the base station radius, of 500 meters to 700 meters, which is there. Now, IoT device has to transmit, and most of the traffic, I understand, is from IoT upwards is there. Downwards is very little. So IoT device has to send traffic upwards to 700 meters and battery of 10 years. That's just not feasible. So hence, whether cellular will work for IoT is the question to Mr. Kapoor.
So interesting question. So two things. One is you mentioned about the tax and the GST part. So I guess between the COI, the ISPI and all associations, we need to work harder because the train has left the station, right? The GST Council's already been meeting, they're taking their decisions, it'll get implemented. So all you can do is pull up your socks and hike your prices. I don't know what you're going to do, but that's what seems to be likely to happen. Okay.
Jain Saab, whenever we talk to DOT about this 8% AGR, they say this is not a tax, this is a fee, and this is a partnership fee. When we are giving you the license, we expect something from you, and it will be a different slab for everybody. Whether already you have paid or not paid, this is not concerned. They are saying that, yeah, this is not a tax, this is a fee, and don't consider it as a tax. So that's why I don't expect that this will be merged with the GST.
Great. I guess both you guys can sit at lunch and, dwell more on it.
Thanks. That was a really good question, and let me see if I can, try to touch upon the key points in a short time. So I know what you're saying. Our common experience, of course, is that smartphones barely last a day. But I think just few things to keep in mind. What really drives the drainage of battery on the phone today, right? Are things like applications that are running all the time. A lot of times it's video, like YouTube and others. For example, today a lot of times for people who are working for companies or organizations, it's emails, because most of us are getting an email every few minutes, for example. So what all these things do is that they not only do they wake up your communications engine on the phone, but they also tend to kind of wake up your display. Now, display is a huge consumer, consumer of battery, actually much larger typically than the communications engine, right? So, so it's kind of all these things coupled together, really, that's kind of driving the fact that your typical smartphone battery struggles to last a day, right? Now, if you compare and contrast it with the IoT use case, right, or at least some segments of IoT use cases, the water meter being one, for example, which typically the only thing it has to do is kind of maybe wake up once a day or maybe once a few days and send out some few bytes of data, right? It's a very different use case, right? There is no display there. There is no high-end video processing that's happening, right? And now the kind of the optimizations that are being brought into standards, into cellular standards, what they allow is that the few bytes of data that the water meter has to send whenever it wakes up, it's able to do it in a very efficient way. What that means is that, today if you look at smartphones, right, because of the fact that they have a lot of data to exchange, there's, for want of a better word, an elaborate process to kind of bring them onto the network, to make sure security is set up, all of that stuff, right? But where all these technical enhancements are going with, in the NB-IoT space, is that all those, let's say the signaling and the protocols required to kind of allow these water meters to enter the network, they've been made very, very simple. Right, so there's very little data to exchange, very little signaling to be done. So what that does is it really reduces the amount of time that your communications engine really needs to be powered on, right? Kind of just to say one more thing. So we have, of course, a lot of, till a year back, we didn't actually have devices. So we only had some lab measurements and so on, some analysis. But now we also have devices that are capable of these types of features. And even in field measurements, these types of advantages and devices lasting, years in fact, on 2 AA batteries, right? That's kind of bearing out. So yeah, while it sounds a little bit surprising from, compared with our practical experience of smartphones, but it's really, keep in mind, it's really the fact that the use cases are enormously different, right? And as well as the form factors are enormously different. There are no high-end displays, there is no video processing, right? Those types of things are really driving your smartphone battery usage.
So, Rohit, just to add on to that, I've seen situations where we're talking about a smart hub at home that is able to gather information from your various meters. One of it, which could be the water meter, and the other one could be other power, and so on and so forth. So, given that situation, you don't really need to connect to a cellular tower directly, but just connect to a hub at home, which can in turn transmit it. I'm assuming that would also help with the power consumption, right?
I think just to say one more thing, what will happen is that, likely there's going to be different use cases. In some use cases, as my colleague mentioned, there's going to be some kind of an aggregator, which aggregates all of these things and ships it off to the network. In other cases, there's likely going to be direct connectivity. So it's probably going to be a little bit use case dependent.
Thank you very much. Subi, your question. Could you get her a mic, please?
Thank you. Subi Chaturvedi, COI. My question is to both Rohit and to Anand. We are speaking specifically to M2M, but this is a larger, broader policy context question and the relationship that business shares with government. When we were looking at the M2M guidelines draft, it troubles us deeply. The conversations on data sovereignty, localization, and data privacy. If we look at the basic premise of M2M, data has to be international, as is the internet. It's unlike telecom. There's a government department, which is Department of Telecommunications, which is making policies, well-intentioned, but as we all know, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So if you have just a tiny little line at the bottom of the guidelines which says all data needs to be local, nothing can be taken out of the country, say goodbye to M2M. How is it that business is engaging through international forums like the ICANN as well as locally with the government, where we're trying to make sure that there's enough sense and sensibility in the kind of frames and structures that we're putting forth for M2M as well as Internet of Things? Both Anand and maybe Rohit can
I'm not sure, Rohit, whether you are interacting with folks at ICANN, or maybe it'll be better for the ISP CP executive committee, some member to try and address that. That may be helpful. Also, locally driven, of course, the point is that different governments will have different approaches to M2M. So the good news is that, okay, our folks at the DoT have started. They are still open to taking inputs, and hopefully they will factor in the industry or business inputs into what finally emerges as the M2M guidelines. But yes, we acknowledge what you mentioned. There are challenges in the manner in which they are articulated presently, and how can we align with one M2M or international practices so that when you actually roll out services on the M2M or IoT platforms, these are aligned with international best practice. So I know at the Tata Communications end, whether whatever outreach you've already begun or deployment of M2M, are you seeing any challenges with the current policy the way it stands?
Not really policy, but the way it is. The guideline continues to say that the data has to terminate within India. And looking at the use cases, almost we feel 85 to 90% of the use cases will be able to follow those guidelines. Because M2M is not just it has to create value. The value cloud services is also offered within Indian premises. So we feel that almost 85% or 90% of the cases, we would be able to meet those guidelines and address the market.
Thank you. Ricardo, could you get your mic to the gentleman there, right next to you?
She's going to reply on the who is question.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much for a very interesting perspective, both the regulation and the industry within India. It's really exciting. So I have one question and also a response to a question about the who is regulation. So first the question, what is the state of IPv6 deployment in mobile in India? So for example, in case of Japan, it's an area that is still not really being ready and observed as a challenge. So our Japanese government has published a report this year in collaboration with the industry players that the Japanese mobile phone infrastructure companies will target to be V6 ready by 2017. So my question is whether there's a private-public sector collaboration, like of similar lines within India in mobile and IPv6. And I don't know if I should move on to my comment about WHOIS, or should I wait for a response about this first?
I'll respond to the IPv6. So the good news is that the government and industry has worked together to make out a IPv6 roadmap. That's a public document. And we'll be happy to share that with you. So from us at COAI, at least for the telco members, there have been some challenges, but it seems to be progressing fine. So there are revised timelines to what was initially thought of, and those have been modified so that the deployment progresses suitably.
Thank you very much. That's excellent. And it's really nice to hear that there's a milestone being set and this is being recognized. So on my comment about the WHOIS is I think I heard something around WHOIS and whether there has been any government considering regulation around WHOIS accuracy. So I work for JPNIC, which is a national internet registry in Japan, focusing on WHOIS for number resources, but I think it's pretty much common for the names as well that we're getting in a time. It's increasingly more important to collaborate with the law enforcement agencies. But at the same time, these policies should be bottom-up, not in terms of government making regulations. So for example, in the names community in ICANN, now there are discussions around reviewing the new GTL WHOIS, which hopefully would address the needs of the law enforcement agencies. In the number resources, the law enforcement agencies will jointly make a proposal to each of the 5 regions in the number resources community to come up with something that would address their needs. So this kind of encouraging the government that these processes are happening and make sure that they actually join in this kind of existing processes, I think would be really important, and hope that the Indian community can help us raise awareness within government in India.
Thank you, and that's exactly the point that one has in mind, actually. And because from COI we are more on the telco side of things, but my colleagues at the ISPI, Rajesh, and yesterday I was speaking to Brajesh as well. So folks who are in the ISP community would be more active, and I'm sure they would be providing inputs to the WHOIS, the group which is handling the WHOIS review. Right. Yes, Tony.
Yes, thank you very much. Tony Holmes as chair of the ISPCP, and it's to that very point. Certainly, there's a lot of focus within ICANN now on next generation WHOIS, and the ISP community are very engaged in that. It's important that we do get a broad spectrum of interest from our members, and we really encourage that. We certainly encourage the Indian community to work closely with us. And as part of the policy development process, as that evolves, then there's ample opportunity to comment on how that work is progressing and provide the right feed. So it's something that's really close to our hearts. It doesn't just affect ISPs, of course. It impacts a much broader community, and it's important that our views are fed into that. So we welcome your input as that progresses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. I think with that, okay, I see one hand go up, and that'll be the last question. Yes, the lady at the back. Well, all right, 2 ladies. So,
Hi, I'm Nandita Singh from Voice and Data. So I heard from the panel that mobile and internet end user should not be mixed. You need a differentiation between customer education at the rural level for mobile and internet use is what I heard. Is that correct?
I don't know what we've conveyed and confused you, but okay. What I can say is that predominantly the internet access will be on the mobile device, right? At least in most developing or not yet connected, internet-connected areas. So in terms of priority for business or for industry, it will be first to actually get people connected up onto the internet, or firstly get a phone in their hands. for those who don't have the mobile phone in their hands, and once they have the mobile phone in their hands, encourage them to start using the internet.
Okay, so I have a question for Rahul and Anand, which is a follow-up question. From the technology convergence point of view, what kind of convergence will we see in mobile and internet technologies going further? If you could share some thoughts on that.
So, Anand. I don't know who's Rahul, but Anand is here.
Sorry, the gentleman from Mr. Kapoor from Qualcomm. Yeah.
Yes, see, M2M is entirely different gamut. When you're talking about mobile and internet, that will continue to be on a licensed spectrum only. But M2M, it opens up both unlicensed and licensed, because there is no technology which kind of defines that this has to be used only for M2M, and this technology should not be used for any other. It is a liberalized technology. That's what I would say. But on unlicensed spectrum is where we feel there's a lot of things are going to happen on an M2M industry. That's the thing.
So the question is going to be, how much of unlicensed spectrum do you actually have? And is it good enough for deployments, right? Anything more?
I can add something to that as well. I think that you asked a very good question about convergence, and one big convergence trend that we certainly see is at a very high level, convergence of technologies across licensed and unlicensed. So, right. So what's happening is that there is kind of this realization that there are lots of opportunities to use unlicensed spectrum in a lot of interesting ways. To kind of, in some cases, to add, to whatever services your licensed spectrum may be providing. So I think what you'll see in the next few years, if I had to hazard a guess, is basically technologies is at a very high level, kind of cellular, Wi-Fi, all of these coming together in some way to address, broad bandwidth needs, right? And I think that's going to be really, really nice, because there are areas today that are covered very well by cellular, areas that are covered very well by unlicensed, or technologies that are deployed in unlicensed, like Wi-Fi. And yeah, there's going to be some kind of convergence there. Yeah.
I think there's a lot of scope for both to coexist, is all that I'll say. Asha, one is, it's a privilege to have an ICANN board member amongst us, and also for her to ask a question as well. First, Asha, I'll come to you later, and that'll be the last. Okay.
Thank you very much, Vikram. So thank you for the kind introduction. So my name is Asha Hemrajani, and I'm on the ICANN board. I wanted to make 2 points. First is, I don't want to comment on the who is, because my colleagues Tony and Izumi-san have addressed that very nicely indeed. I want to emphasize a little bit what Tony said about more participation from this part of the world in the who is story. I want to ask a question actually that's not related to ICANN work, but because I'm a bit of a spectrum expert myself, so I wanted to understand from your perspectives about TV white space and the use of non-licensed or unlicensed spectrum in India. I'm very curious to hear about that. Thank you.
Let me dwell on that. So firstly, in India, it is empty space. It is not white space. White space, it's been spoken of, but particularly for India, there's a very interesting Plum Consulting report, which was done out on the broadcast band, on the TV band, that is the 470 to 698 to be specific. And in that report, it's also been covered, which has been fairly well accepted by the Government of India, between the Department of Telecom and the Broadcast Ministry. They both aligned themselves, and they agreed to try and get the names included in the footnotes of the WRC, along with other countries like Mexico, US, New Zealand, there are other countries, Australia, I guess. The point is that in this band, essentially it's Wi-Fi. It's 802.xx technology that's being put to use. So the question is, who's going to provide the databases for the power as well as for the spectrum allocations? So some pilots have been done in India, and they are being examined by the government. So there is, of course, potential, and the debate would be, and my friend from Qualcomm, I don't know if he's covering this part or not, but yes, we are in conversation with many people saying that if you had 100 megahertz worth in the sub-gigahertz band, what is the kind of throughput you would achieve, either using IMT or whichever technology? So let's have a comparison that in 100 megahertz available in the very valuable UHF band, what would be the best technology to put to use at what cost? So that's the discussion that is happening. And, as we go along, I'm sure the government will examine what's the best manner of putting that particular spectrum to use. I wonder if that addresses. Thank you. All right, the gentleman there, please.
Hi, good morning to all. My name is Kalyan. I'm from STPI, which is an ISP in India. Are there any set of standards framed for IoT or MTM, or what is the status for that? Standards for any IoT?
So, honestly, I'm not really aware. What I'm aware of is that for M2M, we are trying to align as much with one M2M, and there is some work at the TSDSI that if there's an India requirement, that should be put into one M2M, so that any standard is a global, international standard that is followed by India. All right, good. We've got experts in the house.
Thanks for raising this question. This is a very important question where we feel that the participation of India in the standard making process, with whether it is with IoT or even telecom, is very, very low. Okay, so as far as TSDSI, what Vikram mentioned, that is the body which has been created with the help of CDOT, which is working on the standards. But the place where we should actually participate is Internet Engineering Task Force, where there are a lot of work which is happening on IoT standardization. So that should be the place where we should have very clear focus for participation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think with that, I'll bring this discussion to a close, and it's a privilege, and I want to begin by thanking all of you for having attended and taken such active participation, large number of questions. So thank you to the audience, and of course a special thank you to the ISPCP Executive Committee for having set this up, and I hope that ongoing ICANN events, it'll be like a regular feature. We particularly enjoyed being here with you.